Welcome back to chapter 5. This is the third video on the chapter. We are talking about tissues this chapter, and specifically, we're going to get into connective tissues. So, in previous videos, when I talked about connective tissue, I talked about it being a tissue that is used to fill in spaces and protect. I also mentioned that it is the most abundant type of tissue and the most varied. So, some general characteristics of connective tissues are they are the most abundant tissue by weight because they are so varied and because um, they're so much seen around the body, it ends up being the tissue type of the four that is the most abundant in the body, physically the most abundant in the body. These cells are farther apart than epithelial cells. Epithelial cells, remember, are used to cover surfaces, whether it's the external surface of our body, our skin, or it's an internal surface like the lining of one of the systems or the lining or the outside of one of the hollow organs. For example, when you're talking about epithelial cells, these cells are going to be very tightly packed together to provide that protection, that barrier for those organs. Connective tissues are not trying to form a barrier. So those cells are going to be much further apart than epithelial tissue. These cells, these tissues will contain abundant extracellular matrix between the cells that consist of protein fibers and ground substance. All right. So the spaces in between cells, since they are not as tightly packed as epithelials, will have something in between the cells, and maybe small amounts, but something kind of in between the cells that will be protein fibers and a ground substance, depending on what tissue it is, that'll determine the ground substance. The consistency of connective tissues vary, which is another reason why it's so abundant throughout the body. You see, it says that it goes from fluid to solid. You have some connective tissues that are extremely liquid. You have some connective tissues that are very solid, and then you have several in between the two. Your categories that connective tissues can fall under are connective tissue proper and specialized connective tissues. Connective tissues, for the most part, have very good blood supply. So connective tissues are going to be extremely well nourished. Remember, the bloodstream is where you have all the nutrients that your cells need, or at least all the nutrients that you've taken in to your body, that the cells can use to feed, to grow, to heal, and do all those things. So as blood flows throughout the body, the cells that are close to those blood vessels or that are close enough can get nourishment directly from it, which is why, again, connective tissues are so well nourished. Remember, epithelial tissues are avascular. So epithelial tissue itself is not well nourished because, well, let me rephrase that. Epithelial tissue don't get nourishment in the same way. It is dependent on the connective tissue for its nourishment. Most connective tissue cells can divide. Connective tissues can contain fixed cells or wandering cells. And I'm assuming the jobs of those cells or the location of those cells sound like what they are. Fixed cells mean these cells will find their space in the body and then they won't leave. Whereas wandering cells, they will go from part to part in the body and do its job wherever it lands. You all have heard of macrophages before in your previous biology class. I'm sorry, macrophages. Macro meaning big, phage means to eat. So these are cells that go around eating things. These macrophages are cells that will wander around to different parts of the body. They may go into the bloodstream to get from one location to another. But then it finds a tissue that it wants to be in that moment. It moves around in that tissue in order to gobble up things that it does not want, like, or need. Whereas fixed cells, once they get into their location, they're going to be where they are for the rest of their lives, for the rest of their duration. Functions of connective tissues, they bind structures together, they hold things together. They provide support and protection. Again, it does provide protection, but not in the same way as epithelial tissue. It serves as a framework for the body. So in different areas, it will hold things together and help them keep their shape. Think about, so you have your skin, your epidermis on the outside of your skin, on the outside of your body. And deep to that, you have the adipose tissue or fat. You have collagen. You have those things that give your face, your skin, that nice plump appearance, youthful appearance. And that's that connective tissue that as you get older, it doesn't maintain its firmness and its fullness. And so that's how we end up getting skin that doesn't seem as full. We eventually can get wrinkles and etc. because the framework that that connective tissue has provided has started to decrease over time. Connective tissues can fill spaces. So again, that space between your skin and the muscles underneath your skin. That space is filled in with connective tissue. That's what gives it its shape and fills in those excess spaces. It stores fat, adipose tissue. Fat cells are a type of connective tissue. It produces blood cells. So, red blood cells, white blood cells are all types of connective tissue. And the cells that produce those red blood cells, um, for example, bone marrow. Bone marrow is a type of connective tissue that produces blood cells. It can protect against infection. I told you that white blood cells were one of the blood cells that the bone marrow produces. And of course, that helps fight against infection. So connective tissue helps helps against infections. And it helps to repair tissue damage. So connective tissue has properties in it that will allow a body to fix damage, whether it's a cut or bruise or some other kind of damage. Your cells, your connective tissue can go in and help repair that damage so that the structures are whole again. So extracellular matrix is like the body's glue. Um, it can, again, it scaffolding. So scaffolding is like the metal parts of buildings, especially in building construction, that helps you organize the structure as you're building it. And then it helps to maintain that structure once it's built. So in the body, scaffolding, um, the extracellular matrix is considered scaffolding that helps to organize and anchor those tissues, those cells, into a cohesive tissue. So look at this to help you understand what some of the jobs of extracellular matrix a little bit better. And remember that that is a part of the connective tissue and connective tissue job. So here are some major cell types when we're referring to connective tissues. You have fibroblasts, you have macrophages, you have mast cells. So fibroblasts, when you hear fibers, you should hear fibrous, right? So a fiber is going to be, we'll talk about fibers in a minute, but fibers, fibroblasts, think fibers. And when you see the suffix blast, think build. These are cells that build something, and what it's building, it's actually telling you in the name. So these are cells that build fibers. All right. Most of the fibroblasts are fixed cells. They get into an area, they stay in that area. That's where they do their job. These cells can have large star shapes, and they secrete fibers into the extracellular matrix. So these cells build fibers. They are part of the connective tissue, so they are going to be in and help contribute to that extracellular matrix by secreting fibers into the area that it's located, that it is fixed in. So those are fibroblasts. Macrophages. I already mentioned before that these are large cells that eat up stuff. These macrophages are usually attached to fibers but can detach and wander. So if these macrophages are going to attach to fibers, they're going to basically stay in one space and do their job. So they find a space that they want to be in, they kind of hang on to a fiber to stay there, do their job, help eat up and clean up things around it. But if it decides it's done its job or there's another need for it somewhere, it can detach from those fibers and then wander to another space in the body to do its job. It conducts phagocytosis. So again, phago means to eat, cyto means cell, and osis is a process of. So this is a process or a function of this cell eating things. So a macrophage conducts phagocytosis. And this phagocytosis helps to defend against infection. So the way it helps the body heal or clear out infection is to eat up the cell or the particles that are infecting the body. Macrophages are also called histiocyte. Histiocyte, right? Histio, tissue, cyte, cell. Then you have mast cells. You may have heard of mast cells when when people are talking about allergic reactions. So mast cells are going to be large cells. They're going to be widely distributed, meaning they're going to be found in many places throughout the body. One of the functions is to release heparin. Heparin is a chemical that your body makes that is like a blood thinner, all right, a natural blood thinner in the body. So these mast cells can produce a blood thinner, heparin, to help prevent clotting. So if there is a part of the body that needs increased blood flow, whether it is to wash a tissue out, to help remove waste products, to help remove debris from damage, um, to help push infection out, any of those things, the body might want to release heparin to prevent that blood clotting to help continue that blood flow. That's just one example of why a mast cell might release heparin. It will also release histamine. Histamine is the chemical that causes inflammatory responses. So when you have an allergic response to something like um, cat hair or um, dust or something in the atmosphere changes season, your body will release histamine that will help to clear out some of those particles that your body is responding poorly to. This is why you'll see you may end up with a stuffy nose or a runny nose, runny eyes. You may start to get hives. All of those are reactions to your body releasing histamine in order to try to get rid of whatever that particle is, that product is that the body does not like, that the body is responding negatively to. So that is how it's going to get rid of it by creating this inflammatory response that is, in this case, the release of histamine by mast cells. So here you have your star-shaped cell. So we said that your fibroblasts are going to be large star-shaped cells in a fixed area. So star-shaped cells that are they look like they're stuck to the surface to me. This is a macrophage. So you see you have a cell here The body apparently doesn't like it, whether it's because it's a bacteria cell or some other type of invading cell, or maybe it's just old. And it's not functioning the way it's supposed to. This macrophage is going around it to engulf it. All right, to engulf it, to eat it up. And then you have your mast cell here. This mast cell is going to be the cell that releases histamine or heparin, depending on what the job is needed at that time. Let's talk about fibroblasts again. Fibroblasts, remember, blast mean to build. Fibro you should think of fibers. So fibroblasts are going to be fiber producing or fibrous tissue producing cells. It's going to produce three types of fibers within the connective tissues, and each are going to have a slightly different job. You have collagen fibers, elastic fibers, and reticular fibers. Collagen fibers, usually when we hear collagen these days, it's in reference to the skin and looking more youthful, looking more beautiful, plumping up the skin. It's um, the same material that we're talking about here, but that is just one use for it. So collagen fibers, these are going to be thick threads of collagen itself. So collagen put together and creating these thick threads that functions as the body's main structural protein. So it's going to be the main protein that gives the body structure. It has great tensile strength and flexibility. Make sure that you're looking up words like tensile so that you can understand what it means. But collagen fibers give great tensile strength and fiber, meaning that the tissues that contains collagen fibers are going to be strong, but flexible. All right. Slightly elastic. Elastic, look the word up. Make sure you look the word up. But elastic has to do with the ability of a substance to be stretched. Well, not just to be stretched, but to recoil back to its original shape from being stretched. That is the definition of elastic. So make sure you're looking that up to understand it. So collagen fibers are thick threads made up of collagen that's going to function as the body's main structural protein. It's going to be very strong and sturdy, but flexible, and and it's able to snap back to its original shape. Collagen fibers are going to largely be found in your ligaments and tendons. So, in the structures that hold bones together and hold muscles to bones, those are going to be collagen fibers. Think about it. If you have um, a tendon that is connecting a muscle to a bone that's allowing you to be able to move. It needs to be strong so that as our bones move in different directions, our bodies can move as well. That's where you need that flexibility in order to have that movement consistently. Same thing with ligaments. Ligaments are going to be used to join bones together. So, in order to have those bones stay together but still move relative to one another, there needs to be strength and flexibility. So, those are collagen fibers. Elastic fibers will also be called yellow fibers. These fibers are composed of elastin protein. This elastin protein is going to branch. So when you look at it, you can start to see the branching of these fibers. And that's one of those characteristics that will help you understand what it looks like. These tissues or these fibers can stretch and then return to their original shape. So they are elastic and they can stretch. These are not as strong as collagen fibers. These are going to be more elastic, have more stretch, which means it's not going to be as strong. So when we talked about collagen fibers, we talked about their strength and flexibility, which allowed it to hold bones together, which allowed it to hold muscles to bones. But with elastic fibers, you don't have the same level of strength, so it would not be able to work in holding those strong structures together. But it is able to stretch and then snap back to its original shape. You'll find elastic fibers in your vocal cords and in your airways, your respiratory passages, tissues that need to be able to stretch and recoil, but don't need to have the same level of strength as structures that have more collagen fibers. Reticular fibers are going to be the thinnest of the three. These are also going to branch. So if you see fibers under the microscope that branch, then those would be either elastic or reticular fibers. Less likely that they'll be collagen fibers because of their shape. So these two will branch. Um, these are also going to be made of collagen. So reticular fibers are going to be made of collagen, but it's going to be branching collagen. All right. This is going to form a delicate support network. So reticular fibers, though it is made of collagen, it's going to be thinner. It's going to branch, unlike collagen fibers, and it's going to be much more delicate. So in this image, you can see these thick fibers. The gray are going to be your collagen fibers. You can see how this is much thicker than these yellow ones, and that they are long and straight. You pretty much don't see any branching here. Whereas with these elastic fibers, you can see how it branches and it's thinner. So fibroblasts, macrophages, mast cells, these are going to be the three different types of cells. Here are the characteristics and their jobs. This is what they look like. This is what they do. And here you'll find the different substances that are found in your extracellular matrix. So some categories of connective tissues. Connective tissues can be classified in two major categories. You have the connective tissue proper. Make sure that you're looking up what proper stands for, connective tissue proper. The connective tissue proper is going to be divided into two different types of tissue: loose connective tissue, dense connective tissue. Then the other major category of connective tissue is specialized connective tissue. All right. So specialized connective tissue is going to end up being like your cartilage, your bone, and your blood. Remember, we talked about connective tissue being the most abundant and the most varied type of tissue in the body. You know that bone is solid. You know that blood is liquid. And we know that cartilage is kind of a soft solid. All right, so those are going to be your specialized connective tissues. So connective tissue proper, you have loose and dense connective tissues. Your loose connective tissues, well, before I get into that, think about those terms, loose versus dense. Dense implies that something is tightly packed together. There's a lot of stuff packed into a small space. Whereas loose, things are not as tightly packed. They are much, they're not as close together. So with your loose connective tissue, you have fewer collagen fibers than in the dense, obviously, because it is loose. So less collagen fibers than in your dense tissue. And the types of loose connective tissue are going to be these: areolar connective tissue, adipose tissue, and reticular tissue. In your dense connective tissue, you have much more abundant collagen fibers. So this is going to be dense regular, dense irregular, and elastic. So dense regular, dense irregular, meaning how these fibers move together. Regular means it's going to be much more orderly. Irregular means much less orderly. And then you have your specialized connective tissue. I mentioned cartilage, bone, and blood. Make sure you read this clinical application about abnormalities in collagen. So if collagen is not built the way that it should be built, it doesn't lay down in the body the way that it should be laid down. Here are some of the things that can go wrong in the body. Here's some of the disease states that can be caused by this abnormality in the collagen. All right. We talked about, let me go back to, so in this loose connective tissue, we said that the different types are areolar connective tissue, adipose tissue, and reticular tissue. Let's talk about areolar connective tissue. Areolar connective tissue forms a thin, delicate membrane. These cells are mainly fibroblasts. So your areolar connective tissue are going to be mostly made up of fibroblasts that produce fibers, that build fibers and lay it down in that extracellular matrix or that ground substance within those tissues. This is going to be collagenous, so lots of collagen associated with areolar connective tissue, and lots of elastic fibers also associated with areolar connective tissue. This is going to be found a lot in your subcutaneous layer. Sub meaning below, cutaneous referring to skin. So that layer of tissue um, underneath your skin, underneath your, or deep to, let me not say underneath, deep to your um, epidermis and dermis is going to be a good layer of areolar connective tissue. This is going to help nourish those epithelial cells. Remember, epithelial tissue does not have its own blood supply. It's avascular, which means it needs to be nourished by the cells, the connective tissue cells that are deep to it. And areolar connective tissue is deep to a lot of epithelial tissue, and so it can nourish those cells. So those are areolar connective tissues. Adipose tissue. Adipose tissue is basically fat. These are your fat cells come together to um, create your energy storage, your fat and substance storage. Excuse me. Adipocytes. Adipose, so fat, cyto meaning cell. An adipocyte is a fat storage cell. All right, so that's what the word means. And of course, adipocytes store fat. Yay. So when these cells get more and more fat inside their cytoplasm, inside their cellular matrix, what's going to happen is it's going to push the nucleus of that cell to one side. That's going to give adipose tissue its unique signature look. When you look at adipose cells or adipose tissue under the microscope, it will look like a cell that looks empty. It's not because it has fat in it, but you're going to be able to see that nucleus pushed off to one side like it's being squished in a room. Say if you were in a room and somebody filled the room with balloons and you got pushed against the wall because there were so many balloons there, that's what the nucleus looks like, pushed against the wall because there's so much fat inside the cell. Adipose tissue can crowd out other cell types. It acts as cushion and insulation, and it's located in places like beneath the skin. So again, that subcutaneous layer behind the eyeballs. So in the movies, when somebody's eyeball gets plucked out, I know that's kind of gross, but you can sometimes see, let me rephrase that, because we're not looking at eyeballs being ripped out. Anyway, behind the eyeballs, you have lots of adipose tissue that acts as protection and insulation and cushion. You have fat around the heart. So anytime you see an image of a heart, a whole heart, usually you'll see these yellow, this layer of yellow around it, or at least around some parts of it. That is that adipose tissue that surrounds, insulates, and cushions the heart. It also does the same thing in the spaces, I'm sorry, in the kidney, and it fills up the spaces between muscles. So between different muscles that are layered on each other, you'll have some adipose tissue there to cushion, insulate, protect that tissue. So this is your areolar connective tissue. These dots are going to be your fibroblasts. Here, the red or pink color will be your collagen fibers. So those are going to be your thicker fibers that are going to not branch, and they're going to have lots of tensile strength and be elastic. You have these thinner fibers uh, in this tissue. So you'll see these smaller, thinner fibers running through this tissue sample. Those are going to be your elastic fibers. And then you have these dots. The dots are going to be the fibroblasts themselves that are actually, excuse me, that are actually producing the fibers that make up this tissue. And the white spaces in between each are actually not empty spaces. That's going to be the ground substance. So the substance that sort of holds and glues everything together. Remember, a couple of slides ago, there was a page about a clinical page about ground substance being the glue. So that is what that is in this areolar connective tissue. So when you see tissues under the microscope that look like this is going to be your areolar connective tissue. Lots of fibroblasts, these elastic fibers running through throughout the tissue, and then these collagen fibers running throughout the tissue with some ground substance. Your adipose tissue, remember I said that a characteristic of the adipose tissue is that the nucleus, these little dots, are going to be pushed off to the side. So the nuclei are going to be located near the cell membrane. So this dot sitting right next to the cell membrane, dot, which is the nucleus, cell membrane, being pushed off to the side because there's so much adipose tissue or fat located in these cells. So that is a characteristic look of adipose tissue. Two other types of connective tissue. You have reticular connective tissue and then dense regular connective tissues. Reticular connective tissue are composed of a network of thin reticular fibers. They support the walls of internal organs like the liver and spleen. So reticular fibers are going to be found mostly in the walls of your internal organs, and they're going to be composed of a lot of these thin fibers. Your dense regular connective tissue, excuse me. Remember I said dense means that the cells are closely packed together. They are collagenous, lots of collagen fibers in these dense regular connective tissues, and that is going to make it even stronger because remember, collagen is very strong, has a lot of tensile strength. Because these are closely packed, it's going to even be stronger because the more collagen you have closely packed, the stronger that tissue is. It's going to have a fine network of elastic fibers, so there will be elastic fibers associated with this dense regular connective tissue. Most of the cells associated with it are going to be fibroblasts. It's going to be very strong, so dense connective tissue. Regular meaning that all of the fibers are going to be in a regular pattern. They're all going to be parallel to each other so that they give more strength. This is going to allow for more pulling. So it's going to be able to be pulled without breaking, without snapping. This dense regular connective tissue is going to bind body parts together. So your tendons and ligaments, they're going to be dense regular connective tissue that's going to need to be very strong and withstand pulling so that it can hold your bones next to your bones, or it can hold your bones, your muscles on your bones. It's also associated with the dermis, which is the one of the layers of the skin. Now, I talked about connective tissue generally having a very good blood supply, so it can help to nourish the epithelial tissue that is associated with it. The part of connective tissue that is not well supplied with blood, that has a poor blood supply, is this dense, regular connective tissue. So, those of you who have um, pulled or strained an ACL or an MCL, has pulled a ligament, has sprained a tendon, you know that these particular tissues don't heal very quickly, very much not like the skin or the muscles that tend to heal much faster. If you damage a tendon or a ligament, it heals much more slowly because it doesn't have the same level of blood supply associated with it. So you don't have as many of those raw materials and healing nutrients that are going to be in the tissue, I'm sorry, in the blood that can go directly to the tissue to help it heal. So dense, regular connective tissue is going to be one of the few types of connective tissue that have a poor blood supply, causing it to be slow to heal. So reticular connective tissue. You have these reticular fibers. They look very different from what we saw before. So these smaller black lines in this tissue are going to be your reticular fibers. And then the dots in here are going to be your fibroblasts. Some of the dots are going to be your fibroblasts um, that will produce these reticular fibers. So this is the look of reticular tissue. Dense, regular connective tissue. You see how all of these fibers and all of these cells are very closely packed together and everything is right next to each other. You don't have any fibers that are going across, that are going diagonal. Everything is working together, moving in the same direction. That is your dense, regular connective tissue. So none of the tissues that we've looked at so far have this type of look where you have fibers that run next to each other. They're closely packed together. That is your dense, regular connective tissue. So now let's look at dense, irregular, and elastic connective tissue. Dense, irregular. So you still have lots and lots of fibers that are closely packed together in a small space, but they're not going to be organized in the same way. They're not going to have that neat organization. So this one says that it's randomly organized. That's that irregular part. It's still thick. Remember, it's dense, and it's collagenous fibers. So it's still the same type of fibers. They're still thick. They're still strong. It still can withstand a lot of tension. It can withstand a lot of tension, um, meaning it's still thick, but it's not organized in the same way. Because it's irregular, because it's organized randomly, this tissue can now withstand forces coming from multiple different directions. Let's go back to the dense regular. So because this tissue is dense regular, it can withstand being pulled in this direction, right? So if I were to take a rope and this were the rope, these are the fibers of a rope, and I decided to pull with both ends really hard, that's going to snap the rope straight, but the rope won't snap and break in this direction because of that tensile strength. But this direction not necessarily is going to be quite as strong because that's not the direction of the fibers. In this dense, irregular connective tissue, because these are more randomly organized, you'll have more strength to withstand tension from different types of direction. So the dermis of the skin will have this. So if you were to take the skin and kind of stretch it in different direction, it will be able to withstand that. It won't be able to withstand as much tension as your dense regular because of that irregular shape. So you won't be able to use this to hold your bones together, to hold your muscles together on your bones. But it is still strong. And this one is located, an example of its location is around the skeletal muscle. So the dermis of the skin and around the skeletal muscles. Elastic connective tissues. These are going to be your abundant yellow elastic fibers. You're going to have a few collagenous fibers, but not as much, which is why it's considered elastic connective tissue instead of collagenous tissue, because there's more elastic fibers. You're going to have lots of fibroblasts producing these cells. Elastic connective tissue are going to attach between the bones of the spinal column. So the vertebrae that are holding you upright, uh, that are holding your torso up, that is protecting your spinal cord. The attachments between those muscles, those bones, I'm sorry, that are stacked on top of each other are going to be these elastic connective tissues. You're also going to find it in the walls of hollow organs, like your large arteries, your airways, in some parts of the heart. You'll find it, and it has an elastic quality, obviously, because it is elastic tissue, which will allow it to stretch. So, dense, irregular. You still have cells and tissues that are very closely packed together. You see all of this jammed right on top of each other, but it doesn't have that same neat shape, that same neat formation. You see in the drawing that these tissues are all over the place, right? So that is your dense, irregular tissue. And then elastic connective tissue. These dark bands are going to be your elastic fibers. You're going to have collagenous fibers um, dispersed throughout. You have fibroblasts in there, but it's all hard to see because there's so many elastic fibers. You notice in this image, you have the aorta, this large vessel coming off of the heart, um, highlighted. So your aorta, part of the large artery that takes blood from the heart to supply the rest of the body, needs to be extremely elastic because there's a lot of pressure that the heart is exerting to get blood out of the heart into the rest of the body. So this tissue needs to be very elastic, needs to be able to stretch, snap back so that it can stretch again at the next heartbeat. And we have our specialized connective tissues. Specialized connective tissues include your cartilage, your bone, and your blood. These are going to have unique matrix associated with these specialized cells. This is why each of these looks so different because they're specialized. Their matrix is going to be unique for each different type. In cartilage. So cartilage is going to be like gristle. So if you've ever eaten chicken, especially like a chicken leg, and you eat all the meat off the bone, and on the ends of it, you have that kind of clear, whitish, solid, but squishy material that we call gristle, that's actually cartilage. So here it talks about cartilage being a rigid, specialized connective tissue. It's strong, it's just kind of squishy. Um, that gristle in that chicken bone is going to support structures, it's going to help support the framework, and it's going to help support attaching things to one another. It is there to protect that underlying tissue. It's going to serve as a model for bones that are developing. And Inside of that tissue, that gristle, that cartilage, around the cells that are producing this tissue, you're going to have a ground substance that's more gel-like, um, that contains collagen in the gel-like ground substance. So that's why gristle is kind of squishy yet firm. Chondrocytes. Chondro means cartilage, cyto meaning cell. So these cartilaginous cells are going to be found in lacuna. So a lacuna, when I look at this word, I think little lake. So lake is what I look at it as. A lacuna is like a little lake. If you think about a lake, a dry bed lake, so a lake that has no water in it, it's like a big cup in the ground that will store that water. A lacuna is going to be like a little depression in this cartilage that's going to house the chondrocyte. The chondrocyte in its lacuna is then going to be surrounded by the matrix of the cartilage. Cartilage is another connective tissue that lacks blood supply, just like your tendons and your ligaments. So cartilage, once that's broken, once that is damaged, it's going to heal very slowly, again, because it lacks a blood supply. Cartilage is covered by perichondrium. So peri means around, chondro means cartilage. So this is a tissue that's going to be surrounding the cartilage. It's going to be on the outside surrounding the cartilage. And what it's going to do is provide that cartilage with nutrients. All right. So it's going to be a membranous sheet surrounding cartilage that's going to help give it nutrients. There are three different types of cartilage. You have hyaline cartilage, elastic cartilage, and fibrocartilage. We'll delve more into the different types of specialized connective tissue, the different types of cartilage in the next video.